Wokeness, also known as being woke, has become a popular term in recent years as a movement that aims to address social and political issues, including systemic racism, discrimination, and inequality. However, many myths surrounding wokeness can lead to misunderstandings and misconceptions about the movement. In this video, we will explore 20 common myths about wokeness and explain why they are not true. Myth 1. Wokeness is just a trend. Fact: while wokeness has gained popularity recently, it is not just a trend. The movement has been around for decades and is rooted in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Being woke is about recognizing and addressing systemic issues that affect marginalized communities, and it is an ongoing process that requires active engagement. Example: the Black Lives Matter movement, which began in 2013, manifests the ongoing struggle for racial justice in the United States. The campaign has brought attention to the systemic racism and police brutality that Black people face and has inspired people worldwide to take action. Myth 2. Wokeness is about being politically correct. Fact: wokeness is not just about using the right language or being politically correct. It is about being aware of how language and actions can perpetuate harmful social norms and actively working to challenge and change them. Example: using gender-neutral language, such as they instead of he or she, is not just a matter of being politically correct. It is about recognizing that not everyone identifies as male or female and acknowledging the diversity of gender identities. Myth 3. Wokeness is a form of censorship. Fact: wokeness is not about censoring free speech or silencing opposing viewpoints, but about creating a safe and inclusive environment where everyone's voices are heard and respected. Example: cancel culture, which involves boycotting or canceling individuals or entities that have engaged in offensive behavior, is often associated with wokeness. However, cancel culture is not the same as holding people accountable for their actions. Wokeness promotes open and honest dialogue and creates a space for marginalized communities to be heard. Myth 4. Wokeness is anti-white. Fact: being woke does not mean being anti-white. It is about recognizing and challenging the systemic racism and privilege that exists in society, which can benefit some groups, including white people, at the expense of others. Example: white privilege is a term that is often used in discussions of wokeness. It refers to white people's societal advantages, such as more accessible education, housing, and employment access. Recognizing white privilege is not about blaming white people but acknowledging the systemic benefits of being white. Myth 5. Wokeness is only for young people. Fact: wokeness is not limited to young people. People of all ages can be woke and actively work to promote social justice and equality. Example: Angela Davis, a civil rights activist active in the 1960s, is an example of an older person who has been woke for decades. Davis remains an influential voice in the fight for racial and gender equality. Myth 6. Wokeness is only for certain groups. Fact: wokeness is not limited to race, gender, or identity. It is about recognizing and addressing systemic oppression and inequality, which can affect people of all backgrounds. Example: the LGBTQ+ community has been essential to the wokeness movement, as they have fought for equal rights and recognition. However, wokeness is not just for the LGBTQ+ community. Myth 7. Wokeness is about being perfect or pure. Fact: being woke is not about being perfect or pure. It is about recognizing that everyone has biases and blind spots and actively working to address them. Example: it is possible to be both woke and make mistakes, and the important thing is to acknowledge those mistakes and learn from them to avoid making the same ones in the future. Myth 8. Wokeness is a form of identity politics. Fact: wokeness is not just about identity politics, which focuses solely on a particular identity group's political issues and concerns. It is about recognizing the interconnectedness of different social and political issues and working towards a more just and equitable society for everyone. Example: intersectionality, which recognizes the interconnectedness of different forms of oppression, is a key concept in wokeness. It acknowledges that individuals can experience multiple forms of discrimination based on race, gender, sexuality, ability, and other factors. Myth 9. Wokeness is about virtue signaling. Fact: wokeness is not just about virtue signaling or showing off one's commitment to social justice. It is about taking concrete actions to address systemic issues and promote social and political change. Example: posting about social justice issues on social media may be a form of virtue signaling, but it is not enough to make a real difference. Being woke is about actively engaging in actions that promote social justice, such as volunteering, donating to organizations, and advocating for policy changes. Myth 10. Wokeness is divisive. Fact: wokeness is not divisive but about creating a more inclusive and equitable society where everyone's voices are heard and respected. Example: the #MeToo movement, which has brought attention to the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault, has been criticized for being divisive. However, the movement has also brought people together to address a common issue and has sparked meaningful conversations about consent and respect. Myth 11. Wokeness is only for young people. Fact: wokeness is not limited to any particular age group. People of all ages can work towards social justice and promote equality. Example: civil rights activists like Angela Davis and Gloria Steinem have been advocating for social justice for decades and are still involved in activism. Myth 12. Wokeness is about cancel culture and censorship. Fact: wokeness is not about cancel culture or censorship, it is about holding individuals and institutions accountable for their actions and working towards a more just and equitable society. Example: calling out instances of racism or discrimination in media and entertainment is not an act of censorship but rather a way to bring attention to problematic content and promote accountability. Myth 13. Wokeness is about taking away from dominant groups. Fact: wokeness is not about removing dominant groups but promoting equality and equity for all individuals. Example: affirmative action programs, which aim to increase the representation of underrepresented groups in higher education and the workplace, do not take away opportunities from dominant groups but provide opportunities to individuals who have historically faced systemic barriers to access and success. Myth 14. Wokeness is a trend or fad. Fact: wokeness is not a passing trend or fad but a long-term movement towards social justice and equality. Example: the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been active for over a decade, continues to raise awareness about systemic racism and police brutality and has led to significant policy changes and discussions around race and equity. Myth 15. Wokeness is about playing the victim. Fact: wokeness is not about victimhood or playing the victim but about recognizing and addressing systemic issues of oppression and inequality. Example: the #MeToo movement, which has brought attention to the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault, is not about victimhood but rather about empowering survivors to speak out and holding perpetrators accountable for their actions. Myth 16. Wokeness is only for people of certain backgrounds or identities. Fact: wokeness is not limited to any particular background or identity. Anyone can be woke and work towards social justice and equality. Example: white people can be woke and work towards racial justice by educating themselves about systemic racism, listening to and amplifying the voices of people of color, and actively working to dismantle racist systems and structures. Myth 17. Wokeness is about being politically correct or too sensitive. Fact: wokeness is not about being politically correct or too sensitive. It is about recognizing the harmful impact of language and actions on marginalized groups and working towards a more inclusive and equitable society. Example: using gender-neutral language or avoiding racial slurs is not about being overly sensitive or politically correct but respecting all individuals and promoting inclusion. Myth 18. Wokeness is anti-capitalist. Fact: wokeness is not necessarily anti-capitalist but instead recognizes the negative impact that capitalism can have on marginalized communities and works towards promoting equity and justice within the system. Example: calls for a living wage or better working conditions for workers are not anti-capitalist but aim to promote fairness and equity within the capitalist system. Myth 19. Wokeness is a form of extremism. Fact: wokeness is not a form of extremism but rather a movement towards social justice and equality for all individuals. Example, advocating for police reform or greater access to healthcare for marginalized communities is not extremist, but rather a necessary step towards creating a more just and equitable society. Myth 20. Wokeness is about reverse discrimination. Fact: wokeness is not about reverse discrimination or promoting one group over another. It is about recognizing and addressing systemic issues of oppression and inequality. Example, affirmative action programs, which aim to increase the representation of underrepresented groups in higher education and the workplace, do not discriminate against dominant groups but promote diversity and equity. In conclusion, wokeness is a movement that seeks to address systemic issues of oppression and inequality. By dispelling common myths and misconceptions about wokeness, we can better understand its goals and work towards a more just and equitable society for everyone.